Welcome, everyone, to Ladder Daily Digest. And with me today is Megan Connor of the Midlife Revolution. Welcome, Megan.
Thanks for having me again.
And Steve Pinecker of Mormon Book Review and the Utah Interfaith.
The Utah Interfaith channel and Mormon Book Review.
Okay. Okay.
And it's Mormon Book Reviews, not Mormon Book Review.
So that means you have more than one episode.
Yes.
Okay, that's good. and Ganesh is on TikTok a lot. And where else do you appear?
I've done a number of podcasts for Mormonish, and my kind of forte is Joseph Smith and the Book of Mormon. So I just finished doing a Book of Mormon deep dive on TikTok, going through the Come Follow Me program for this year and looking at it from a lens of if this is Joseph, what can we learn about Joseph from the text? So that's maybe slightly different.
How Joseph's life interacts with the text of the Book of Mormon.
That's correct. Yep. And how it kind of came about in real time with him on the ground in places like Harmony and Fayette.
Right. And Ganesh is a former bishop with the LDS Church. Megan is not a former bishop, I understand.
Well, I did declare myself bishop of the Digital First Ward, but it's an honorary distinction.
That's right. Self-proclaimed. And Steve Pinecker is a dry Mormon, we'll say.
Fabulous.
Steve is a unicorn in the religion community, right, Steve?
And so, in the Mormon podcast space, I think I've been called the Switzerland of Mormonism. I think arguably the only neutral Mormon podcaster, which puts me in a very unique spot. I sometimes tell people I think if I chose a lane, I'd probably have a bigger channel because one week I'll have Jacob Hansen on and have one side will be an uproar, and then the next week I'd have John DeLynn on and the other uproar, and I'm like, you don't understand me if you're going to judge me by the guests I'm talk. The whole point of this exercise is to talk to everyone and do it in a fair and impartial way, and to let people tell their story. And people get mad at me. Well, you knew this about this person. I said, yeah, I know, but they're coming on my platform to tell their story the way they want to tell it. And if somebody wants to come on and give a counter narrative, they can go ahead and do that. And I invite them to do that. That's the whole point, is that I want people to tell their story, and sometimes I'll push back, but I don't necessarily think it's about having a show where we're trying to have a conflict. We're trying to find the commonalities with people.
That's right. And I've been on Steve's show twice, and nobody cares.
You've been more than twice.
Well, I guess 3 times, because you introduced, I guess, Ladder Daily Digest.
Yeah.
And then I've had you on a few times for the sale of the properties earlier this year from the LDS Church Brighamites to the Community of Christ. I mean, the other way around. Community of Christ to the LDS Church.
Yeah. That was quite an interesting story, and we broke it here at MBR when John Hychek came on, and it was kind of a crazy time, just because here I am in a mobile home, 50-year-old mobile home, living with his mom in Florida, and break one of the biggest news stories in the history of the Restoration. That was a real whirlwind.
The epicenter of Mormon and other faith news.
Yeah.
So anyway, I thought we would do a show. We would talk about the value of religion, like without dogma, right? Dan McClellan has a show called Data, Not Dogma. I recently had Gregory Prince on the show, and he talked about how Leonard Arrington was all about data and not dogma. And so made me think about, if there ever was going to be a large tent unifying sort of church, what would the properties be? And so I've entitled this either The Best of Religiosity or The Best of Religion, and we'll see what happens. And we'll start with Megan. Megan, maybe you can share some things that you think would be necessary for a large tent place that people can congregate and feel safe at.
Yeah, I think one of the most helpful aspects of religion in general is the community aspect of it. The idea that we all care for each other and that we are concerned for each other's well-being, and whether that's physically or spiritually. The idea of coming together just as a community and a group to find some common ground with each other and to check in with each other and to care for each other. I think that's the thing that I find the most helpful about healthy religions is when it really is a community of people who just genuinely care for each other. I think we need community, and being able to unite over spirituality also, gives it a little added level, because I think we human beings are spiritual beings, and we need that as well. So when you can combine spirituality and community in a healthy way, I think that's really valuable.
Ganesh, as a bishop, what things about your congregation really uplifted you?
Diversity for me. I live in a city, and it gave a broad spectrum of the people that are around. In Wellington, where I live, we had people who were paupers and people who were millionaires. People who were university professors and people who were next to illiterate, and different ethnicities from all over the world. So I think that the idea that if you have something that is common and and maybe unique enough, you can bring a great deal of different people together, and they can interact in a way that enriches everybody's life. So for me, that has been a really valuable experience. The other thing I think, which is really important as part of that, is resource sharing. I think that communities, what they do is suggest that, okay, well, if there is some diversity, somebody has something that somebody else doesn't have, or vice versa, that there can be an exchange, a mechanism of exchange that allows for people to get what they need in a valuable and
spiritual bartering.
Yeah, it is absolutely spiritual bartering, but it may have incredibly physical effects, right? This fact that, someone's going to come and bring you a casserole or help you move from one place to another. It has some very tangible financial, results. So, that ability to trust another person because they turn up and maybe suggest that they believe the same way that you do, gives a mechanism of exchange which can be incredibly valuable for people, particularly those on the margin.
And I think serving others in your congregation helps, strengthen, your relationships with people. And so Megan, I know, has gone to a lot of different congregations and different settings where she's performed. Stephen has gone to lots of different wards, different congregations, different things, different settings, because you enjoy it, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
What have you seen from all, like in each one, there needs to be something for a congregation to be, a good place to be.
It's been a real interesting journey I've been on. I first darkened the door of a church within the Restoration in May or June. I think it was May of 2021 when I visited the Forest Hills congregation of the Church of Jesus Christ in Holiday, Florida. That particular church is part of the Bickertonite organization. And that was a real spiritually uplifting event that happened to me. I actually felt the spirit in that congregation. It was a remarkable service, and I get out there. I try to get out there every few months, and that was the first. But then, paralleling that too, I gave a sermon at a Community of Christ, the local Community of Christ here, the Sarasota Bradenton congregation, a couple of years ago, and I've also visited many churches in my backyard. And a little over a year ago, I darkened the door of a church called the Harvest in Sarasota, and it is an evangelical church, but it's made a shift over the course of the last couple of years. The church has shifted into a direction in which it welcomes everybody in the community and is not exclusionary in its policies, and welcomes people in the LGBT community. But not only that, but they even have a church employee who's an atheist. And so it's even welcoming to atheists, which to me, that's the kind of church I want to go to, that's open to everybody. And I want to parallel that with, actually, interestingly enough, a progressive church that I went to last year. And unfortunately, I did not feel welcome in that congregation because it was so far left and so political. Everything was political, and it was hurtful. It was the only church I didn't partake of communion that participated in open communion because I didn't feel like a connection to that particular community. So I saw an example of how on the right we see churches that push people out for being different than them, but then parallel that with a progressive church that I did not feel welcome in.
So you experienced liberal dogma.
Yes. Yeah. And so that's I think we all need to self-reflect here. I don't think it's just one side. I think both sides do it. And that's one of those things about religion that's a negative thing. But just to bounce back on my church, the reason why I started attending that church is because they're very active in the community. I don't know if it's every Thursday or every other Thursday, but you go there, there's cars lined up. They literally feed 400 families during these drives. They do work with women and addictions, addiction stuff. They have facilities for people to stay in. So this is a perfect example of a church doing right, doing a great service in the community, helping people out. And so to me, it's an example of a church that is a welcoming place for everyone. And this is a church, I guarantee you, there's people who voted for Trump that go to that church and people that voted for Kamala. I mean, that's the reality, is it's a very diverse church. And that's where I feel is like a safe space. I want to strive for more churches to be like the Harvest in Sarasota. And my pastor, Dan Miner, I want to give you a shout out. Really appreciate you, my brother. And he's been a really good pastor to me. And that's really important. So, but yeah, I just want to talk about a real world experience where it's not just a theoretical thing, but an actual church that's putting into practice a lot of the values that I find very important.
For me, religion was all about sports when I was young and activities, right? Mm-hmm. We had dances, we had road shows, we had, I live in the San Francisco Bay Area. We had Oakland Temple Pageant where 3 groups of stakes would come in every 3 years. And it was an opportunity to, learn more about theater production. And I sang in the balcony choir because my voice can be hidden behind 200 other good voices. And it was just, the experience of, being with people and doing those things. And back to sports again, we had a team that was pretty good for our area. And we wanted to stretch, right? Instead of just winning regional, playing against the Mormons all the time and beating all the Mormon teams, we participated in an interfaith tournament somewhere in Central California. And we, experienced, brotherhood with people of other faiths. Kyle Baptist was a church that was really, really good. And we went 2 years in a row, and 2 years in a row, we each met each other in the finals. And I think one team won one year and one team won another. But, physical activity is, for me, was like religion, growing up, being able to, exert, I guess for some people it's dance, right? They can worship through dance. Other people can worship through music. And for me, we were like worshiping through sports. Now, except for there's, I can't remember the name of the movie, Ward Ball or what it was called.
Church Ball, was it?
Church Ball, yeah. And there are some people who are, frustrated junior varsity bench warmers who end up trying to dominate, at church, and they kind of get a little bit rough, a little bit excited, a little bit taking things too seriously instead of thinking it as a brotherhood. And so there have been some very, we'll say, non-spiritual events that occurred during some basketball and other sports things at sometimes. And I, as the stake sports director, tried to implement some changes, like instead of it being all about the winner would represent our stake to move on into some tournament, I tried to say, hey, let's share the wealth. Let's say, San Leandro First Ward is going to go this year, and let's play hard against them so that they can become the best team that they can be, not to beat them necessarily, but to experience, athletic growth, so it didn't take very much, but it was fun to try. And
that's
so,
also the challenge of any kind of organization, isn't it? That if everybody is special, nobody is special. So there's a competition element which allows for communities, organizations, sports teams, of course, to reach potential by suggesting that they are better than, or they can dominate in some way. There's something kind of innate about our desire to have something that we're connected to and passionate about and tribal, and also that we can win.
Yeah, I liked the sports aspect of my time in the LDS church too. We always had a track meet for the youth every year. I really loved girls' camp. That was one of my very favorite things about being in the church. Skills that I still use to this day because I love being outdoors. I love cooking over the fire. I love camping. Just that was a really fun part of my experience as well. Just the opportunity to be together with other girls, learning these outdoor skills and competing in canoe races as well and things like that. I love that part of it.
that's right. Steve, your work at Utah Interfaith Forum, what are kind of the goals of that entity?
About a little over a year ago, I was handed over control of the Utah Interfaith Forum Facebook group. And it was built by a Latter-day Saint, faithful Latter-day Saint. And he said, all I did was model the values that in what you are doing with your channel. I modeled that on basing that on the Utah Interfaith Forum.
Everything I needed to know, I learned on Mormon book reviews, is what he said.
What he said. And I didn't think of myself as being an interfaith thing, even though it's obviously is an interfaith. I just never thought of it from that context. I was like, okay. Well, then I thought, well, why don't I start a channel? That's what I do, YouTube channel. So we started the Utah Interfaith Forum channel, which been having a hard time getting going, mostly because of my health condition from earlier this year. Kind of put that on the back burner, and I'm working on kind of getting MBR back on track too. Effectively lost 2.5 months of programming, but I think what's so important is having these conversations with people of other faith traditions. The Utah Interfaith Forum is basically within the context it's Utah based, so it's generally going to be a conversation that outsiders or people outside of the LDS Church are having with the LDS Church. So we've had a rabbi on, we've had different faith leaders. We've also interviewed somebody who does the chaplaincy program for the church. Those are interviews I've taped and still haven't released them yet. So my co-host Monica is a Latter-day Saint, and I'm an evangelical, and then we're talking to faith leaders that interact in the Utah religious space, and whether it's evangelical or Catholic or Jewish or whatever. And I think it's really important just to model these conversations that people of different faith traditions can get along with each other. I think there's a lot of good people in all the different religions, and I think that when we bring out the good, one thing I don't like. There's sometimes anti-religious bigotry in some of these X spaces that I sometimes feel hostility generated towards me. Sometimes in the ex-Mormon Reddit, especially early on, you're an evangelical. What are you doing here? I'm like, hold on. Not every evangelical is a certain way. And now I think, generally speaking, I'm accepted in that group. But there was a lot of, you could call it anti-religious bigotry. They just stereotype you based on the label you have and just assume all these things about you that are not true. And so I think it's just really important to model how we can have civil conversations and have atheists on and be civil with them and vice versa, and show that it doesn't always have to be at war with each other. And I also think that there's a lot of good in all the religions. And I think that if we can find those good things that we can get out of all these different religions and kind of embrace those things and kind of set aside some of the baggage, I think we can help create a religious environment in which it can be nourishing, it can be helpful to people's spiritual walk, it can be respectful where they're at in their journey. And I think that's what I want to do. I think that this idea of this Manchian black and white thinking that often permeates these religious spaces has been so divisive in our world and especially our country that I think a lot of people are really thirsting for something that's different. And I do think we'll have a revival, if you will, of people who want to embrace spirituality, but also eliminate a lot of the baggage and the hurt that caused them their religious and spiritual PTSD and trauma. And I think we need healing spaces for those people, especially. They need spirit. They need the church community probably more than anybody else does, and they need a safe space for them. And that's why I think there's more and more churches are creating those safe spaces now, realizing there's a real need and hunger for that kind of space.
I so agree with you, Stephen. I love that. No, I'm just agreeing with you. I think that, if you really do believe in a higher power, then, let's embrace the idea that everyone's path to spirituality is going to be just as diverse as we as individuals are, based on our individual experiences. And let's just allow everyone to have their spiritual path without assigning our value system to whatever that path is. And I think if we can do more of that and have more of those conversations, then we can have that community space together and, just embrace each other where we are on that spiritual path, rather than, judging or assigning any kind of meaning to it.
I think part of that is when people are on sort of the other side of dogmatic beliefs, when they reject the dogmatic belief, the perspective sometimes is that religions don't necessarily create good people, but they attract good people to the situation. I know that, most religions have a origin story attached to them or whatever. And also there's a situation where I think life coaching is becoming big, because maybe that is what's happening, is that the people aren't getting out of church maybe what they had hoped to get. And so they're relying on other avenues to get, growth, personal growth and things like that.
I think there's also a understanding that, whenever you participate in any organization, group, even a nation, right, there are things that make you belong and ways that you have to turn up to exist in that particular space. But it's never fits everybody. So there's generally something about you that maybe you suppress at a public level, that you maybe,
conform.
That you conform. Of course, every organization, every border requires you to participate in a certain way or turn up in a certain way. So, and yet we are unique individuals that might have a diverse belief or things that make us tick. And so either we do that privately in our own homes, or maybe we form our own little internal groups that we associate with, so that we can signal to others that we believe in a certain way. And this is how we exist as a species, because most people can't change their country. They can't just leave if they don't like the political situation or the circumstance. So then you find ways to kind of have a public persona and a underground persona. And I think that works with religion, of course, too. You might turn up in a certain way because that's expected of you, but what you actually believe or how you interact with other people, privately, and it can be quite different. And so it's really interesting to me to see how organizations let you turn up and let you profess a public persona, so that it seems like that you are the same or feel very similar to the person who's sitting next to you. But if you had if you were able to have a really curious discussion, you might find that they are completely different. But, organizations, effectively pigeonhole us but that gives us some advantage in that we are then able to talk to people that are quite different than us, maybe even build some bridges, trade, or just exist.
And learning can happen in exchange of ideas.
So it's just that's just how it works. And I think if people understand that about the spaces that they're in, they might not get quite as frustrated, because I think that oftentimes, particularly if you're a marginalized person, you go to a space and you feel like, well, this, you want to be seen, you want to be heard, you want to be validated, and the the group is not going to validate everything. So, if you can understand that it can probably validate something about you, maybe multiple things, but it's never going to validate everything. So you're going to have to find either other groups to belong to so that you can feel that validation, or there's going to be a part of you that you turn up with in one space and then another part of you that you turn up with in another space. And that's just life. It's frustrating and it's annoying and sometimes it's even hurtful, but that's just the way that it works. And you might be able to go into a space and because of the privilege that you have in that space, exert some measure of expansion or inclusion or maybe pushback. But generally, most people are at the level where we're subject to the spaces we're in rather than controlling them or pivoting them. So and so maybe that's partly what we need to understand about how we turn up in religions and what religions can do for us, and then pick and choose. I know that's a cafeteria style, and we all think that cafeteria style shouldn't actually exist, but everything is a cafeteria, and we all pick and choose because that's just life. And and recognizing that and acknowledging that, I think, is a little bit of it gives us more health in the spaces that we turn up.
Yeah, Ganesh, I love what you're saying, and it reminds me of that Maya Angelou quote. I don't know if you know this one, where she says, "I don't belong anywhere until I belong nowhere and everywhere. I belong to myself." And I'll give you a non-religious example of when I felt something similar to that. I used to be an avid CrossFitter. And as a 50-year-old woman, I am not the typical CrossFitter. The gym that I went to was full of a bunch of 20 to 30-year-olds who had been doing CrossFit for 10 or 15 years, and all their body shape all looked a very certain way, and my body shape was not that. But on Saturday mornings, it was sort of a more open gym, and the workouts were a little less strenuous, and it was a community. We supported each other no matter where we were on our fitness journey. But I remember sitting there after a workout and looking at all of these 20-somethings, some of them newly married, some of them with tiny kids, and my kids are almost all grown and gone. And I remember sitting there thinking, like, I don't look like these guys. I don't have the same, careers or the same body or the same financial standing or the same life situation as any of the people in this gym. But I belong here because I know myself well enough that I know what my goals and aspirations are. And I can find the common ground of we all care very much about becoming better physically and becoming stronger mentally. And so then I can go to, a group of 50 to 60-year-old women, and I can belong there as well. And then I can come on this podcast and I can belong here as well, because I know myself well enough that I don't need external validation. I'm not looking for anyone else to tell me that I belong. I belong to myself. So therefore, I can go anywhere and belong anywhere. I think if more of us can adopt that sort of mindset of not having to change to fit in, but to offer what I have in order to belong. I think if more of us could make that tiny little shift, it would make interacting in these spaces with differences of opinions and values much, much easier.
That's incredibly wise. I love it.
I know that Megan does some coaching, and have you had a sufficient amount of clients where there are some similarities? People are having similar issues, or is it still sort of diverse and you just never know what you're going to get?
Well, I have people come to me for a huge variety of different things. I have a few people who are either starting a business or have their own business and are stuck somewhere and need help. I have people who are dealing with difficult family relationships. I have people who are leaving religion, and pretty much everything in between. And what's really interesting is that I had a lot of people interested in doing a group coaching situation. And I started thinking through, like, should I have a business group and a family group and a mother's group? And the more that I meditated about what each of my clients needed, I realized that it all comes down to one single thing. No matter where you are stuck in life or what you're struggling with, most of the time, it's because you're having a difficult time making the decision that is the most loving thing for yourself. Most people are operating where they're making decisions that benefit other people, or that benefit the family, or that benefit the religion, or that benefit the business. And they forget that they have to take care of themselves first in order to be a better business person, a better partner, a better mother, a better father, a better brother, whatever it is. So what I encourage all of my clients to do, and what I help teach all of my clients to do, is to learn how to love themselves better so that they can show up as the best version of themselves no matter where they are.
That's right. I envision a Mormon church someday where General Conference would look like a bunch of TED Talks, where you're engaged, you're learning something new. It's a variety of things you're picking up, and so that's my hope for the future for that.
It's a great idea.
Steve, you have a few more minutes. Is there? I know that you sort of enjoy the spirit that you get when you go to different congregations. Do you feel a sense that you also get to add to the places that you visit?
Yeah, I feel that I'm welcomed, and I also feel that they want to engage with me and have conversations. And so, yeah, I think that I feel like I'm a person of value, to the point of, like, giving a sermon at a Community of Christ service, to being blessed by an apostle in the Bickertonite Church, to having wonderful engagements with Elder Neil Anderson. Just recently ran into him at the Tallahassee Temple, and Ahmad
I hope
Corbett.
he's okay. No, I'm just kidding. You ran into him.
Ahmad Corbett, who's a general authority, gave me a tour of the Tallahassee Temple last month, and they're interested in having the conversation. And I was having this great conversation with Ahmad, who was raised Nation of Islam, and his mom converts to a Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, and now he's oversees the southeastern region of the United States. And I just had such a wonderful conversation with him, exchanged emailed him later that day, and he responded right back to me. So I know that and even Neil Anderson went to me and he said, "Steve, I just want to thank you for the great interfaith work you're doing with your channel." He's watched my channel. And so I was like, wow, to hear that from an apostle was, remember the Quorum of the 12, was pretty amazing. I think what's more importantly, though, is, as much as I hope that I'm contributing to these spaces and these conversations, I really feel listening to these voices for me has been so important. Hearing people's stories, even, Megan, in some sense, I'm kind of a life coach too, because I have a lot of people that reach out to me, and people in mixed faith marriages, people who are having faith crises, people who what's interesting, a lot of young men in their late teens and early 20s reach out to me, kind of, it's that point in their life where they're still trying to figure things out. Then they come to me for help. And there's some are Christians, some have left the church, some are joining the church, and just have this interesting dynamic with these young men to, help them in their life journey that they're at. So I kind of look at it as a ministry to help other people, and that's what it's become. I feel really blessed and privileged to be in this space, to engage people from their different faith traditions, from Buddhists to atheists to Latter-day Saints to, you name them. And I've been able to engage with these people and have these great exchanges. And I think that it spiritually has helped me tremendously to have all these people in my life that have been deeply impactful to me and taught me a lot of things about myself and taught me a lot of things about other people. I didn't know any transgender people when I started this channel. Now I have very close friendships with transgender people, and I'm learning from them. I don't understand everything, but I'm at least learning and having an open mind. And so that, I think, helps with aids with the spiritual development too, is that as you are able to grow spiritually, you can also impact people and help in their spiritual growth as well. If they can see that you are damaged and hurt by the church, but then able to come back to it and with a different lens and a different way of doing things, and doing church under your own terms, if you will, it's very liberating. But it's also, you can take all the good that comes out in the churches, but you don't have to follow. You don't have to take it all and be expected. You have to follow and lock and march step with everything that's being taught. And so I've always been independent. I've always been an anarchist in one sense, and I've never formally ever joined a church, not because I don't believe in church membership, nor does my pastor. So that's another big thing I love. But I don't know. I think, and that's the other thing too, Gene, is, I was isolated for a long time from a lot of family and friends, from a community. And I think building community is so important, no matter where you're at, even if you're in a non-religious context. It's important to have these communities, because you can't go at it alone. And we're all hardwired to be spiritual. We are spiritual animals. We're all hardwired for this. So even for people who don't believe, you don't throw out the baby with the bathwater. There's still things that you can learn from spiritual practices and spirituality. And I think it can be very helpful in your life. Don't cut yourself off from what got us here, which was basically the reason why the human race exists to this day, is because they were believers. They believed.
They banded together.
Yep, banded together.
Passed on their genes.
Exactly. And so that gave us a great evolutionary advantage. And so, speaking to atheists, don't throw the baby out with the bathwater. There's still some things that can be very helpful to you in these spiritual spaces as well.
That's right. Life coaches are kind of like freelance ministers. So Ganesh, you have experienced other religions and in your area of the country, and where you have relatives. And are there things that other religions do that the Western world could learn from?
Certainly. My name Ganesh is actually a Hindu god. Hinduism is probably the biggest polytheistic religion on the planet. And the idea that there are different deities, that you might have a connection with a particular deity or invoke them for a goal that you have, is a really interesting one. I think that the only way that kind of translates in a monotheistic space is in Catholicism with saints. The idea that you might have a patron saint over a particular idea or space that you want to have some kind of interaction with.
Polysaintism.
Polysaintism, yes. And polytheism is actually really, it's obviously a very old practice, because the idea that you might have warring deities in the heaven that might explain the warring tribes on the earth is a very ancient one. But the idea that you might have a favorite sports team, it means that generally we see polytheism turn up in probably the biggest religion on the planet, which is sports. So the idea that you might have a tribe, that you might go to war, that you might have a particular tribal deity that gives or infuses some kind of power, and worshipping or giving some connection to that gives you some prominence, some pride, and it allows you to interact, I think is a really interesting one, and maybe one that if we're thinking about religion, that we might do that in certain ways, or that we might feel like we have a god or a polytheistic god that we might interact with. I was most recently in Saudi Arabia, which was really interesting. I hadn't been there before, and of course, it's the national religion to be Islamic in Saudi Arabia, such that they have had religious police and forces. You can't be anything else other than Muslim, which means that even when you get a visa to go there, you promise certain things, even as somebody who's outside of Islam. You promise you're not allowed to go to Mecca. You have to abide the law of the land, which is the religious majority. But talking to people in those spaces, going to the mosque, listening to the Imran, and understanding why this captures people's imagination and why they, invest so heavily into it. One of the things I see that is really, I think, is fascinating is that, that worship place in Islam is connected to the call to prayer, which is that 5 times a day prostration of yourself on the ground in prayer as you recite parts of the Quran. And that is something that's really interesting. I go to yoga, which is a Hindu practice, and that's also a way in which you prostrate your body, in saluting the sun and greeting the day, and that there's a physicality inbuilt into some of these ancient religions that allow for a physical expression of a spiritual practice. And so I think
a mind-body connection.
Yes, and Mormonism has that in its temples, right? That was the whole idea. You got up, you got down, you positioned yourself in certain ways and connected with others in a physical sense to enact these rituals and transact spiritual terms with a physicality that enabled you to participate in ordinance. And I think that there's something very interesting about those things. So that kind of polytheism, which I think Mormonism has in a slightly different way, the physicality of worship and ritual that many religions have and are based upon. For Hinduism, that means going to the temple, offering a sacrifice to your particular deity that you want to have infuse or invoke during your day. Gosh, one of the things I love about India is how spiritual it is. You walk around and you feel like everything's alive because the dance of people, and there are billions of them, is infused in the way that people turn up at a temple, during their day to invoke a purpose and an intention for what their practice and their life is revolved around. And I think that these are things that give people safety and security. They make people feel in control, and that settles people through the anxiety of just living, which can often be very traumatic, sometimes uncertain, and maybe even just violent. So I find those things fascinating, and I find too, if you're thinking about what it is that gives you peace, what is it that helps you to feel connected and belong, as Megan was talking about earlier, what are the things that help you turn up in those kinds of ways, physically, spiritually, emotionally, mentally, intellectually even. That's, if you're being very conscious about it, there's a lot to learn from other religions and certainly Eastern and religions as well.
Steve, what type of things do you do other than going to church that increase your spirituality or whatever throughout the week?
Well, it's funny. I went to a men's retreat years ago when I was a young man, and there's this gentleman from England named Bryn Jones, who was part of a charismatic renewal movement in England. And he spoke about how where there are 2 or more gathered in my name, I am there. He said, that's church. He says, where there's 2 or more gathered in my name, that's a church service. That means whether you're having coffee with a friend and they're a Christian, they're a believer, that's church. Your daily interactions is a church service. That's that when you're engaging with other believers. And that always stuck with me. Like, wow, church isn't just a space or a place that you go to on a Sunday morning. Church is a lived experience that you live daily. And so I think that's really gave me really opened my eyes to what church really is. And it's about the community that you're in. It's about with the people, your neighbors, all of this. It's applying these principles to the real world and making it not just about what you do on a Sunday, but what you do during the rest of the week is also part of the church service that you're having, the communion that you're having with the community and with the divine. And that's kind of how I engage it. I think every day I'm going to church. Every time I do an interview, I'm going to church. Every time I have a phone call with somebody, I'm going to church. So that's kind of how I look at it. It really, that's why, like I tell people, I don't care what building you go to on Sunday morning, nor does God. The question I have is, do you have a personal relationship with the Savior? That's what's more important to me from the Christian context than anything else. And so I want to thank Bryn Jones for really opening my mind up to what church can be and what it actually is. And it's more than just something we do once a week.
I think I have a healthy addiction to podcasting because I get to meet lots of interesting people. I get to hear different views. I get to, understand them. A lot of times they'll talk about their story, growing up or whatever. So you get to see and listen to other people's experiences, and it's enlightening and deep down makes me feel, more connected to humanity overall. And so I think that's good. Megan, I know that Britt Hartley does tarot card reading and things like that and she says that anything like that can just be a sort of a way of focusing on issues at hand, sort of almost like meditation. Do you experience any of that type of thing, or so like an extracurricular religious spiritual practice?
Yeah, I think my to say if it's extracurricular, I think my greatest spiritual connection is being out in nature and observing the similarities between what's in nature and what's in myself. Looking at the root system of trees and plants and seeing how it's so similar to my own vascular system. The realization that I'm connected to every single living thing on this planet because I'm made of the same elements, and recognizing that I'm a member of the human family, that we're all connected to each other through, physiology. And I love being in nature and observing both the symmetry and also the chaos in nature. And, the realization that there's so much that seems like very particularly designed and other things that seem so happenstance, and just pondering the possibility of those two things. Pondering the idea of, all of the different ideas of deity and creators that exist across the scope of humanity, whether in the past or in the present, and all of the different faith traditions that there are, and sort of the ways that they're all connected and the similarities that they have. Just being out in nature and pondering those things gives me that sense of awe and wonder that I got when I was in a formal religious setting. And it's what fills me up and keeps me going.
That's cool.
I love it. Well, I wanted to say that my church, I just was pulling up our monthly calendar for activities, and once a month our church does a nature thing as well.
Nice.
It's called Wild Wonder, and
I love
it's kind
that.
of a cool thing that the church is doing.
Ganesh, what do you see as sort of like the near future of sort of humanity and religion and connectivity and solutions to problems, going forward on Earth?
That's a huge topic there.
30 seconds.
30 seconds. Okay. Well, it seems like people want to be more in charge of what's going on in their lives, which I applaud. And it looks to me like younger people are rallying around causes rather than movements. Something they can, attach to short bursts, feel, productive and feel like they accomplished something that is
results oriented.
Yeah, absolutely. So I think that, I think that there is also a need for something that is, has some longevity, something that you apply over a long period of time with incremental changes, that requires some patience and some investment. The thing I think we're really struggling with is finding trustable sources for that kind of investment, because lots of the organizations, a lot of the tribes that we belong to, have felt very dishonest, or at least, they haven't come through with, there's something that skims off the top. I think that's fueling that kind of a conspiracy theory feel that is uncertain and unsafe. So yeah, I think that the way that is manifesting, or at least people are dealing with, is just finding something that brings them joy and investing in it for the period of time that it does, and maybe not being so attached to it that you feel broken when it doesn't satisfy your demands, or it doesn't help you belong. Just recognizing that we are part of something great, that we can contribute, and and when something doesn't serve us, that we can move on. I think that's a healthy way, and it seems to be how the people that I see in my life, at least, it's particularly in the younger generation, and certainly those who are a little bit older, are navigating that uncertainty of life.
Yeah, so there's lots of, in the media, like dystopian futures, but you see that the future's in good hands with the youth. You're observing some good news.
Oh, absolutely. I do a lot of leadership with young people, and I always feel incredibly inspired by them. I can give them a few tools that I think will be useful, but actually they're just good. They want their organizations, they want the places that they turn up to be good places, to be ethical, to be fair, to be inclusive, and I find that incredibly inspiring and amazingly beautiful. I guess one of the things I was kind of really shocked by when I went to Berlin recently was finding out that the Nazi Party were very young, like incredibly young, and that was a little disturbing. I guess that means that we need to make sure, as slightly older, middle-aged people with some privilege, that we're making sure that there are pathways forward for our young people to feel empowered and to reach the next steps, rather than feel disillusioned and worried, and so therefore they kind of look at revolution rather than enhancement.
There you go. Steve, what is your vision of the future?
30 seconds, right? So I'm overall positive. I'm an optimistic person. I think we are living in very difficult times that will be looked upon as by historians as being a very unique period of history that we have been in for arguably for the last 25 years. When you think about all the history that's happened in the last 25 years, it's truly remarkable. But just because we're going through tough times now as a species, we've gone through many, many tough times. As a matter of fact, there were bottlenecks in our evolutionary development in which we almost didn't make it. So
you'll take what we're going through now over a meteor that's the size of Manhattan.
Great. Yes. So I'm optimistic about the future. I think there's one of the things I like to do with fostering this dialogue is I like to do it with questions. So I have these 3 questions that I ask, and this is 3 questions an evangelical should ask a believer of the Book of Mormon. Question number 1, what is your favorite Bible story? 2, what is your favorite Book of Mormon story? And 3, who is Jesus to you? I'm encouraging evangelicals to approach the conversation that way rather than be confrontational. And I think if you ask those 3 questions, the conversation is going to go in a different direction than if you're a typical evangelical who's trying to convert or tell them how to live their lives or whatever, saying they're going to hell. Ask these 3 questions. I think you'll have positive dialogue. And the other is 2 questions that my co-host Monica asks on the Utah Interfaith Forum channel, which is, what is one of your favorite things about your faith tradition? And then the second question is, what is your favorite thing about another faith tradition? And I love the way starting dialogue with these types of questions will lead down to better paths for humanity. And so I want people to reframe. And even if you're coming from a different perspective, try to ask a question that's going to lead to dialogue as opposed to conflict.
There you go. Megan, you get the final 30 seconds.
Well, no pressure.
It could be 2 minutes.
I thank you, Stephen, for saying that. I love that idea of asking better questions so that we find common spaces. I think that's so important. And I too am just by nature an optimist, and I look at the younger generation. I look at my children who are adults. My oldest daughter's 30. My youngest daughter's 15. And I look at those kids and they're just incredibly resilient and they're incredibly smart. And they have this desire for things to be more kind and more generous and more equitable and more loving. And I think that this younger generation has the capability of solving a lot of these problems that we've been struggling with over, like you say, Stephen, the last 25 years. And we do live in really difficult times right now, but I think about my ancestors who lived through world wars and the Great Depression and things like that. And I think, they came through it as well. And it was because of an amalgamation of ideas between the younger generation and the older generation. I think the younger generations took advantage of the older generation's wisdom and they came together and they found solutions. And that's where my hope is. My hope is that there's going to be more, like you say, Stephen, common ground dialogue between different people. And just like Ganesh, you said right at the very beginning, this sharing of resources, this sharing of ideas, and the sharing of experiences. If we can do more sharing with each other and learn from each other's different perspectives, then we can solve all of these big, huge problems that we're dealing with right now. And that's where my faith is. That's where my hope is for the future.
And I kind of have a faith and hope in, we'll say, science and rational thinking. We're in like the information age, and we have in front of us, the most learning that has, repositories. Like the internet is a repository of all the learning that's been happening, as far as we can tell, right? Who knows what the library at Alexandria, really contained or had, but comparatively, it's a similar situation. We have lots of information, lots of stuff out there. Now there's a danger where there's somebody else's new facts. If they don't like the other facts, they try to think of new facts. And there's people that, resist things like flat earth theory people, or people who think that we haven't gone to the moon or things like that. And there are other things, that we have to, be careful. But I noticed in the last 30 or 40 years, the younger generation does seem to be more critical thinkers. But at the same time, there's also susceptibility to like a little bit of knowledge is dangerous every now and then. So if anybody has any final comments, you could raise your hand. Otherwise, I'll just end it there and say thanks everyone for watching. Visit all of our channels. We'll try to have some links in our description to the different shows. We're going to have Ganesh on pretty soon because his book is going to come out. And thanks, Steve and Megan, for joining. And I think it was a pretty fun time. Thanks, everybody, for watching. Have a great rest of the year. Bye-bye.
Fabulous. Thanks, Gene.
Yeah, thanks. It was so great to talk with you guys today.
Fabulous.
That was